I always enjoy watching the home movies of my grandparents that show my mom as a baby and then as a young child, because it was always very interesting to me to see such a family atmosphere and such a crazy sense of humor and the funny things that he would do in these home videos that people never expected to see from him. And yet you saw obviously a lot of love, a lot of fun, a lot of just enjoying each other that is not really part of his public persona. Well, my grandparents enjoyed traveling and they traveled all over the world. We actually had a few holidays. One I remember specifically was in St. Moritz, Switzerland, which was a favorite place of theirs. They actually had their honeymoon there, and they would occasionally go back to St. Moritz. And we had a wonderful Christmas there, I remember, with the sleigh rides and the ice skating and all of that. We also have holidays in Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz was the retreat where my grandparents would go to get away from the busyness of work in Los Angeles and all that was going on there. They acquired it actually in the early 40s. It was on a mountaintop in the Santa Cruz Mountains. It was a Spanish-style colonial home, very warm, very inviting, very entertaining, friendly. And it was a place for everyone to just relax and to be themselves. My grandparents' home in Los Angeles area was actually in Bel Air, and it was on the Bel Air Country Club. They had acquired it in 1941, and I remember a story of my grandmother telling me that they had first rented a home from Carol Lombard when they first arrived in Los Angeles, and then after a process of a while, they started looking around for homes. And they had seen this house that they had really liked. My grandmother had really liked it. And they didn't quite know, they weren't sure. My grandfather wasn't sure. And then as a gift to my grandmother, he surprised her with a handbag, and inside the handbag was a wallet. And inside the wallet was the house key to their house in Bel Air. He had bought it for her. And they lived there both until the day they died.
I'd have to say the first memories are probably around the dining room table, sitting with my family and them, and my grandmother and my grandfather cooking a meal in the kitchen, and then we all sat around the table eating a delicious gourmet meal.
My father loved food. He was truly a gourmet, but only a gourmet in the sense of simple food. Nothing fancy. He did not like fancy recipes or anything like that. He liked plain, simple food.
My grandmother did all her own cooking, and she actually made out menus for dinner parties ahead of time. And everyone helped in the kitchen. My grandfather would help carve things up and help with the cooking. So it was a complete family affair.
For my sisters and myself, we saw my grandmother a lot more than my grandfather because he was working at the studio. And my grandmother was the one who would take us to lunch and shopping and things like that on school holidays. And my grandmother really held the upper hand of the relationship, as small and petite as she was. And he deferred to her, whether it be personal business or even in his business.
My mother was actually in the film business before my father. When he came to the studio and met her, and eventually they got married, before that she was working in the studio long before he was, and she said she saw this young man coming in with these big cardboard things, and what they were is this was during silent movies. He drew the scenes for what was up on the screen. And that's how he started and how he and my mother got started. And then my mother worked with him on every picture that he did.
My grandparents loved animals, and they had their West Highland Terriers, and they were always a part of the family and always allowed to sit with us at the dinner table, on the floor, picking up the scraps. And we all are still animal lovers, and that's really been carried on.
My grandfather was a lover of animals, just absolutely loved animals. And I had a pet rabbit, and his name was Fred, and Fred got sick and passed away, and so I was very upset. And Grandpa called me one day and said, after he'd found out that Fred had died, and said, well, you really shouldn't be alone. Why don't you come over and stay with your grandmother and I, because I know how you feel, what a loss it is. And so I did. I went over there, and they were very sympathetic. And I noticed that there's usually a dog in most of the movies.
All dogs come to me. Got him on face.
He was a complete lover of animals, him and my grandmother.
Like many other institutions, murder is a victim of the 20th century. There are many causes for alarm, but I'm particularly concerned with the decline of murder in the home. When I was young, respectable people committed murder in private, behind closed doors and among friends.
One of my fondest memories of my grandparents really is the sense of humor that they both had. They both had the very dry British sense of humor. And my grandfather would do things at family gatherings that my sisters and I would look at each other and just kind of roll our eyes, not really understanding his sense of humor.
He loved to tell riddles, and not jokes per se like we know jokes, but more figuring out what would happen at the end of the riddle. It was that kind of humor that he would tell my sisters and I, and it was a lot of fun.
Once I remember my parents were out of town, my sister and I were staying with them, and he drove us to church. He didn't drive a lot, and there was a reason, because he wasn't very good at it. But he drove us to church, and as he pulled into the parking lot and pulled into the parking space, he hit the car in front of him, and then he backed up and hit the car behind him, and he got very flustered.
And then he'd say, all right, let's get out, let's go into Mass. And my sister and I would just be looking at each other, but he thought the whole thing was hysterical and didn't take it very seriously.
I used to pick my grandfather up at the studio, and we would do grocery shopping. He loved to go to the market, and I would pick him up in my Volkswagen Bug, and we'd go to a grocery store on the way home. And it was amazing when a lot of the housewives would look, because they would never really think that couldn't be Alfred Hitchcock in the produce department. And it was quite a stir in the market to see him shopping for food.
I became conscious of him being famous when we would go out to dinner. We would go with them to Chasen's in Los Angeles, and the fans would come over, either waiting outside the restaurant or even people within the restaurant, and ask for his autograph.
We were at an event at my high school, and a lot of people kept asking him for autographs, and it was kind of starting to get to me, and I said, well, Grandpa, doesn't that bother you? Just people keep asking you. And he said no, because I wouldn't be where I was without them. And this is in the 70s, so he was very famous, but he still always put the fans first. And I think that's why he made a lot of motion pictures, is to entertain. He wanted to entertain people.
I'm the youngest of 3 sisters, and my oldest sister, Mary, has 3 daughters, Melissa, Kelly, and Caitlin. The oldest, Melissa, recently passed away from the effects of the disease cystic fibrosis. And then my middle sister, Terry, has 2 daughters, Tricia and Kate. And I have 2 children, Samantha and Christopher. And we are all a very, very close family, not only going through Melissa's disease and the years of struggling with that, but with her recent passing, it's, I think, something that's even brought the family closer. My mother continues through the Hitchcock legacy to try to find a cure for this disease that so devastated this family, and she's melded those 2 things together so that at the end of the day, no other family will have to go through the tragedy that we've gone through.
My family has always been very lucky to have had such a wonderful grandfather, a wonderful father in our lives, not just because of who he was to us, but what his legacy is to the film industry and what he has left for everyone. And he will always live on through his films. And I think it's important to us as a family to continue his legacy, and as each generation comes along, introducing his films to a new generation.